Oh, Hare Krishna, dear devotees, thank you very much for joining today. Seek the blessings of Krishna Balaram and Radha Madhav, Radha Shyam Sundar, Gauranitai Srila Prabhupada and Guru Maharaj to continue with the overview of 10th Canto, 87th chapter. And this is, and also seek the blessings of the assembled Vaishnavas so that we can enter into the nectar of the Bhagavatam.
Tattavagami naveti pava uttha subhashubayo guna viguna mayamstahi deha vretam chagiraha anuyugam anuvayam saguna gita paramparaya sarana brito yatastam Aparvarga gate manuga jay. Translation: when a person realizes you, he no longer cares about his good and bad fortune arising from past pious and sinful acts, since it is you alone who control this good and bad fortune. Such a realized devotee also disregards what ordinary living beings say about him. Every day he fills his ears with your glories, which are recited in each age by the unbroken succession of Manu's descendants, and thus you become his ultimate salvation.
So this is a very nice, very nice verse, because this point about good and bad fortune that's coming from past pious and sinful activities no longer impacts one who is self-realized. And the reason for that is the soul is Satchit Ananda. And when he's self-realized, he understands that no harm can come to him because he's Satchit Ananda Vigraha, Satchit Ananda. So he's protected by the Supreme Lord. And who is that realized person? One who fills his ears with the glories of Lord Krishna in a disciplic succession. So, chapter is entitled The Prayers of the Personified Vedas. I must admit, I spent a few days on this chapter a few weeks ago. It is a pretty challenging chapter. So, let's see what we can do. This chapter presents the prayers by the personified Vedas, glorifying the personal and impersonal aspects of Lord Narayan. Parikshit Maharaj asks how the Vedas can reveal the Lord, and how the Vedas can directly refer to the absolute, supreme absolute truth, Brahman. Since the Vedas deal with material realm, governed by the three modes of nature, and Brahman is completely transcendental to these three modes. Interesting question. And he's asking because Vedas generally deal with karma kanda activities, how to please the demigods. So how can they at the same time reveal the absolute truth? And here the absolute truth is, the term is a little bit used a bit loosely. It includes Brahman, which is one aspect of the absolute truth, which is the formless aspect, the sunshine of the Lord. In reply, Sukadeva Goswami said that the Supreme Lord manifested the material intelligence, senses, mind, and vital air of the living entity so that they can indulge their desires for sense gratification, take repeated births to engage in fruitive activities, become elevated in future lives, and ultimately attain liberation. This is what the Vedas does. It gradually brings one up through the karma kanda process. By satisfying the demigods, one becomes a little bit more pious. Yes, Naniman.
Yes, the first chapter, the first line, it says that this chapter presents the prayers by the personified Vedas, glorifying the personally, etc. But there's, I think, my opinion, they're suggesting that this Vedas personified means they have become like a form, like a human form, or like have taken. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Correct.
Okay.
That's right. Absolutely spot on. And the personified, in fact, the Vedas exists in the spiritual world. They are representing the four sides on there of Golok Vrindavan, in fact. So the Vedas are, when they come in the form here, they're a little bit different from the personified Vedas in the spiritual world, because here the subject matter changes somewhat. Karma Kanda enters into the equation. But effectively, these Vedas do represent the Vedas in the spiritual kingdom. And they're personified. They actually take a form and they glorify the Supreme Lord.
Yeah, I think in the Golok Vrindavan, there's at each gate one of the Vedas are there, isn't it?
That's it.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
So they're actually in a personal form.
In a personal
rather than the books or the knowledge that we get here.
Yes, book as well, but personal form is the origin.
Okay, this okay.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Thank you for asking, and keep asking, Mataji.
Like normally I sometimes try to read the purports, but here I couldn't because there's so much there. I wouldn't understand. Only understood one part, which was from the Istopanishad, but otherwise I didn't understand.
Yeah, this is quite a challenging chapter, I have to say.
Yeah. All right.
Because there's a conversation in a conversation in a conversation, and you sort of lose the thread a bit. So he then described an ancient encounter. Who described? This is Sukadev Goswami, described an ancient encounter between Lord Narayan Rishi, Sri Narayan Rishi.
This is not Narayan.
Narayan Rishi, and Narad Muni at Badrikasham. Traveling to that sacred hermitage, Narad found the Lord surrounded by exalted residents of the nearby village of Kalapa. After bowing down to Narayan Rishi and his associates, Narad submitted the same question, right, to Sri Narayan Rishi. In reply, Sri Narayan Rishi related an account of how this very question had been discussed long ago among the sages living on Janaklok. Now, Janalok is above the heavenly planets, just below Satyalok, the planet of Lord Brahma. So very high.
Riyansh is asking a question.
Yes, Riyansh.
I want to tell that Nara means Arjuna, Narayana means Krishna. So it's a combination of Krishna and Arjuna.
I think that's Narayan, right? Narayan. They are, I think that's who it refers to, right? Narayan Rishi. So Nara is Arjun and Narayan is Vishnu.
Yeah.
So this is an example of the Vedic scriptures. And this is an idea of the ambit of Vedic knowledge, which is absolutely humongous. Billions of verses. And Bhagavad Gita comprises this knowledge into 700 or even less verses. Anyway. So what happened? These sages in Janalok, mental sons of Brahma, were all perfect celibates on Janalok, feeling inquisitive about the nature of the Absolute Truth, chose Sanandana Kumar, so that's one of the four Kumaras, to speak on the subject. Sanandana told them how the numerous personified Vedas, so numerous, not just one, many, to awaken the Lord, appeared as the first emanations from the breath of Lord Narayan. They recited prayers for his glorification just before the creation.
This is the Vedas.
Yeah. Sanandana then proceeded to recite these elaborate prayers of the Vedas. So these are many, many verses here. So, O you who awaken all the energies of the moving and non-moving embodied beings, sometimes the Vedas can recognize you as you sport with your material and spiritual potencies. So this is the Vedas, which are, these prayers are within the Vedas, right? It is towards you alone that the Vedic sages direct all their thoughts, words, and acts. After all, how can the footsteps of men fail to touch the earth on which they live? So, nice example. So the sages, they direct everything towards the Supreme Lord. Yeah. Just like when men walk on the earth, they can't but avoid the earth. So the sages cannot but avoid the Lord. Everything is dedicated to him. The wise get rid of all misery by diving deep into the nectarian ocean of topics about you. Then what to speak of those who, having by spiritual strength rid their mind of bad habits and freed themselves from time, are able to worship your true nature? Only if they become your faithful followers are those who breathe actually alive. Otherwise, their breathing is like that of a bellow. That's that thing, isn't it? Bellow is something like the, what do they call those guys?
Blacksmiths.
Blacksmiths use to put air into the fire. Hot air. Worshippers raise their consciousness upward to the top of the head, where they can perceive you directly. Then passing through the top of the head towards the supreme destination, they reach that place from which they will never again fall to this world. So there are examples of this. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, one of his associates, so his grandfather, in fact, passed away from this world. He moved the soul to the top of the head and it burst through that soft spot on the head, top of the head. Quite a rare occurrence. Those of spotless intelligence who are altogether free from material attachments realize your undifferentiated, unchanging self to be the permanent reality amongst all these impermanent life forms. So in this world, we are thinking, you know, family, friends, etc., they're our permanent relationships, but actually they're impermanent life forms. So the sages, those who are intelligent, they understand that the Supreme Lord is the permanent reality amongst every and amongst the unreal world or impermanent world. The Vedas describe the soul to be part and parcel of you. And learned sages become imbued with faith and worship your lotus feet, to which all sacrifices, Vedic sacrifices in this world are offered, which are the source of liberation. So we are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, a tiny part and parcel. We're not the Supreme Lord, but we are a little part of Supreme Lord, tiny part. Because the soul is eternal, just like God is eternal. Will never die. And just like God has lots of powers, we also have some power. This soul can control the body of an ant or a body of an elephant. So it's powerful. But of course, in comparison to the Supreme Lord, there's no power. Some fortunate souls have gotten relief from the fatigue of material life by diving into your pastimes, which you enact when you manifest your personal forms to propagate the unfathomable science of the self. So,
Prabhuji,
yes.
yeah, it appears as if this Kumar is speaking to Krishna, but he's speaking not to the Krishna, isn't it?
Yeah, he's basically relaying the Vedas, prayers to Krishna.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he was asked to do by the sons of Brahma. Mental.
Yes, that's correct. The mental sons of Brahma asked him about the nature of the absolute truth. And they chose Sandana Kumar to speak, who basically spoke what the Vedas, the prayers that the Vedas spoke to Lord Narayan before the creation.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little confusing. It's very confusing, actually.
Thank you.
So we should be in this situation where we are sick and tired of this material world. We're tolerating it, and we're trying to serve, and we're happy to serve the Supreme Lord. If He wants us here, we'll stay here and serve Him as best of our ability. But we're not going to try to enjoy the temporary nature of this world. These rare souls, indifferent even to liberation, renounce the happiness of home and family because of their association with devotees who are like flocks of swans enjoying at your lotus feet. When this human body is used for your devotional service, it acts as oneself. This is interesting. It acts as one's self, friend, and beloved. But unfortunately, although you show mercy to the conditioned souls and affectionately help them, people in general fail to delight in you. Instead, they commit spiritual suicide by worshipping illusion. Alas, because they persistently hope for success in their devotion to the unreal, they continue to wonder about this great, fearful world, assuming various degraded bodies. So it's really sweetly explaining how what we're like in this world. Simply by constantly thinking of Him or you, Krishna, the enemies of the Lord, attained the same supreme truth, whom the sages fixed in yoga worship by controlling their breath, mind, and senses. So yogis go through quite a challenging process, controlling the breath and mind. But the enemies of the Lord, they attain the same simply by thinking of Krishna constantly. Of course, it's not recommended to think negatively of the Lord. So if we're thinking constantly of the Lord in a positive manner, then what to speak, what that can achieve. Everyone in this world has recently been born and will soon die. So how can anyone here know Him who existed prior to everything else and who gave rise to the first learned sage, Brahma, and all the subsequent demigods? Supposed authorities who declare that matter is the origin of existence. So these are the wonderful scientists, that the self is compounded of separate aspects of spirit and matter. All such authorities base their teachings on mistaken ideas that hide the truth. So this Big Bang theory and how Darwin's theory of it's just such a huge illusion, such a massive untruth. And the thing is, even the intellectual people fall for it. I remember I went to one school like a few months ago, and we were just talking about the Big Bang theory. And one teacher said, yes, this is accepted knowledge. I said, yeah, accepted by you and people who want to fool everybody. But how can a Big Bang cause great order in the universe? It just doesn't make even any sense. So what to speak of logic? There is no logic there. You just providing an untruth and making it truthful by seem truthful by writing books and theses and all sorts of word jugglery to explain something that's just totally doesn't make any sense. You've got to have just half a cell of common sense to understand that a Big Bang can never lead to a massive order we see in the universe. But scientists will have us believe otherwise. And unfortunately, they teach this to the school children. So from a very young age, they're brainwashed into thinking something ridiculous. Anyway, the teacher didn't argue back. The dualistic conception that the living entity, mind you, I don't think the school's going to invite me back again. The dualistic conception that the living entity is produced from the three modes of material nature is simply a product of ignorance. So what is this dualistic conception? It's I and mine, basically. I and mine. Enemy, friend, heat, cold, happiness, distress. The three modes of material nature comprise everything in this world, from the simplest phenomena to the complex human body. Although these phenomena appear real, they're only a false reflection of the spiritual reality. So whatever we see here is just simply a reflection. Just like in this 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains about the banyan tree, which is, you can see the reflection in the water, that the roots are going upwards and the branches going downwards. So this world is the exact opposite of the spiritual world. The devotees who worship you as the shelter of all beings disregard death and place their feet on his head. So this is really interesting comment. Death personified comes before the devotee. And what does the devotee do? He puts his feet on the head of death to attain Krishna, of course. But with the words of the Vedas, you bind the non-devotees like animals, though they may be vastly learned scholars. They have so many degrees and doctorates, but yet foolish. No better than the animals in one sense. Your material energy causes the various moving and non-moving species of life to appear by activating their material desires. But only when and if you sport with her, that's the material energy, by briefly glancing at her. This is the glance of Lord Bodhakshay Vishnu, glancing at Rama Devi. And Rama Devi glances further. Material energy is brought into life. It is simply illusion for someone to think that he knows the Supreme Lord, who is equally present in each of his expansions, since whatever knowledge one gains by material means must be imperfect. Neither material nature nor the soul who tries to enjoy her are ever born. Yet living bodies come into being when these two combine. This is really incredible process that the Lord has, which is so inconceivable, very difficult to understand. What to speak of understanding the Lord himself. The wise souls who understand how your Maya deludes all living beings render loving service to you, who are the source of liberation from birth and death. How indeed can fear of material life affect your faithful servants? Prabhupada used to say that when he was chanting, he would feel fearless. So when we're chanting, our focus has to be right. Then we got nothing to fear. The mind is like an impetuous horse that even persons who have regulated their senses and breath cannot control. Yeah, mind is so tough to control. We all know it, right? We all been there. We all keep going there. The mind is so tough to control. Those in this world who try to tame the uncontrolled mind, but who abandon the feet of their spiritual master, encounter hundreds of obstacles in their cultivation of various distressful practices. To those who take shelter of you, What further use have such devotees for their servants, their children, or even bodies, their wives, money, houses, land, good health, conveyances? It's a little bit like this Sudama and the Shrutadeva that we've been talking about last few weeks, days rather. They're really completely focused on the Supreme. They don't care if they have nothing. And for those who fail to appreciate the truth about you and go on to...
Excuse me, can I ask you one question?
Yes, Baba.
Where it is, you said something about mind.
Yeah.
Those in this world who try to tame and control the mind, but who have done the feet of their spiritual master, encounter hundreds of obstacles in their cultivation of various distressful practices. So that is true, because it's difficult to control the mind.
Extremely difficult.
Anytime, even you're doing your prayers, it's just
mind
is you are trying to control, you are focusing on reading what you're reading, but still that mind is going miles away.
Indeed.
It's, I mean, when you read that, I said, this is really true. And how can you control that?
So Krishna actually gives the answer to Arjun, because Arjun said the same thing to him. You know, it's easier for me to control the wind, he said, than to control my mind. So Krishna answered him, you're right, he said. It is hard to control the mind, but it's possible. And there's two things, he said to Arjun. One is by practice. So when the mind goes, bring it back. When you're chanting,
I keep saying, go away.
No, bring it back. If the mind goes somewhere while you're meditating, bring it back to the meditation. You will see the mind go, bring it back. So practice, keep practicing, practice. And second is detachment. Don't worry about anything else. Don't worry about who's going to cook the food. Don't worry about going to be late for work. Don't worry about I'm going to do this, that, and the other. Become detached. And when one is detached, at least for that moment of meditation, that moment of self-realization, that will assist to control the mind.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for asking. Thank you for the interaction. It's good. Very good. And for those who fail to appreciate the truth about you and go on pursuing the pleasure of sex, what could there be in this entire world that could give them real happiness? Anyone who even once turns his mind towards you, the ever blissful soul of all existence, no longer dedicates himself to serving family, life at home, which simply robs a man of his good qualities. So this is interesting. Anyone who once turns his mind towards you. So this can take some time. Yeah, as if we have put ourselves towards the Supreme Lord, then we are on the journey. It may take a long time, may take a short time, but we're on the journey. And that's important to understand. We are on the journey. Sometimes we may have a little detour here and there, but we should understand that we are under the protection of the Supreme Lord. Sometimes Maya is so strong, you might just get diverted. But we should understand that we are under the protection of the Supreme, and we will get there. It's just a question of time. We've started the journey. We've turned our mind towards him. But we know the mind is hard to control. So we just have to tolerate the mind and continue with our practice. See where we get to. The learned words of your Vedas bewilder all persons whose minds have been dulled by hearing the incantations of sacrificial rituals. So this is the point about karma kanda. Funny, we interviewed 6 priests today for our schools and temple. And practically each and every one of them talked about karma kanda, how they very proud of doing the karma kanda rituals. But what does what does the Vedas themselves say? The Vedas says these these particular karma kanda words of the Vedas bewilder all persons whose mind have been dulled by hearing the incantations of sacrificial rituals. We're not into sacrificial rituals. We want to do bhakti. This is the point. The illusory material nature attracts the minute living entity to embrace her. And as a result, he assumes forms composed of her qualities. Subsequently, he loses all his spiritual qualities, must undergo repeated births, deaths. So this is the point about how when we interact with the material world, we assume her qualities. We assume, the desires we have, they manifest into different forms so that we can fulfill those desires. So we acquire her qualities. This is really dangerous stuff. And this is unfortunately what we like to do. We like to embrace the material energy. The living entity likes to embrace this material energy. We're stuck, but we're on the path. Members of the renounced order who fail to uproot the last traces of material desire in their hearts remain impure. And thus you do not allow them to understand you. So especially those who are in the renounced order, this is a really, if one is in the renounced order and one has these material desires, I want to become guru, I want people to bow down to my lotus feet. There's going to be a problem. There's a problem. He won't allow that person to understand him, even though supposedly he's in the renounced order. Although you are present within their hearts, for them you are like a jewel worn around the neck of a man who has totally forgotten it is there. Those who practice yoga only for sense gratification must suffer punishment both in this life and the next, from death, who will not release them, and from you, whose kingdom they cannot reach. This is pretty powerful words from the personified Vedas. When a person realizes you, he no longer cares about his good and bad fortune arising. So that's the verse we read, from past pious and sinful acts, since it is you alone who control this good and bad fortune. So he doesn't care for infamy or fame or heretofore, wealth or poverty. Such a realized devotee also disregards what ordinary living beings say about him. Every day he fills his ears with your glories, which are recited in each age by the unbroken succession of Manu's descendants, and thus you become his ultimate salvation. Because you are unlimited, neither the Lord of heaven nor even you yourself can ever reach the end of your glories. Whew. So those were the prayers from the personified Vedas. Then the residents of Janaloka were perfectly satisfied upon hearing Sanandana recite the prayers of the personified Vedas, which enlightened them about the true nature of the absolute truth. So the original question from Parikshit Maharaj was, how can the Vedas explain the absolute truth? So this is the answer. The answer was given by Sanandana about how the Vedas perceives the absolute supreme truth. So it's a little hard, a little complex to completely get the head around this chapter. But effectively, this is the answer, these 30 odd verses. They honored Sanananda with their worship. Narayan Rishi guided Narad to faithfully meditate on these instructions. Thinking about it, Narad Muni was equally satisfied to hear the philosophy from Sri Narayan Rishi. Then Narad offered his obeisances to the Lord and then went to see his disciple Vedvyas, to whom he explained everything he had heard. So it's almost like a full circle. Isn't it? We start with that, we're almost ending with Narad back again to Vedvyas. Summary of the philosophy by who? Thus Sukadeva Goswami replied Parikshit's question concerning how the mind can have access to the absolute truth, which is indescribable by material words and devoid of material qualities. He is the Lord who eternally watches over this universe, who exists before, during, and after its manifestation. He is the master of both the unmanifest material energy and the spirit soul. After sending forth the creation, he enters within it, accompanying each living entity. There, he creates the material bodies and then remains as their regulator. By surrendering to him, one can escape the embrace of illusion, just as a dreaming person forgets his own body. One who wants liberation from fear should constantly meditate upon him. So, oh, put it here. Okay. Any questions, any comments, please? Tough chapter.
It's really a tough chapter, Prabhuji.
Yes. It is
That's coming towards the end as well.
yeah, we're nearly there now.
Kind of, yeah.
So yes, I think we should tomorrow and Sunday and Monday we should then complete the 10th canto. But just
Tomorrow,
gee.
sorry to disturb. Tomorrow I won't able to join because tomorrow I'm going to funeral.
Oh yes.
I don't know what time I'll come back.
No worries.
Sunday I'll go to family in the house. Then I'll join Monday.
Okay. Thank you for
So,
letting us know, Bhavin.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Close this.
Okay. So, Madhusudan Prabhu, over to you.
Okay. Haribol, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. This is quite a deep philosophical and chapter, and there's so much, even in the purports, there's so much elaborated, in each of these verses, because it's actually trying to understand how, first of all, sometimes they understand, well, how can Vedas be personified?
Yeah.
And I was trying to get my head around this. So I realized that Vedas are actually, although they were divided into 4 sections like Rig, Sama, and Yajur and Atharva Vedas, but that Vedvyas did that. But Vedas are actually just one, but like personified. So there is a personality, and in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Vedescha sarvaham, so Krishna says, by all the Vedas, I am to be known. So it's like saying, when I ask a question, Facebook is very famous. So when we think of Facebook, we think of a personality behind that Facebook. And it Mark Zuckerberg, somewhere, I don't know his full name, but we think of him as a personality behind that Facebook. Same thing, Amazon, we think of Elon Musk or this Tesla. The guys, billionaires behind this. It's like that, but that's how I think, the Vedas, there's personality behind. So Vedas is actually personified like that. But then how can, let me just go through the instruction then. The chapter reveals to us how the Vedas personified can describe the qualities of the Supreme Absolute Truth, the Supreme Personality of God, Krishna. So Maharaj Parikshit wants to know that how can Brahman, so Brahman is the impersonal, effulgent, bit like sunshine. The sunshine and the sun particles are 3 aspects of the realization. So Paramatma, Bhagwan, and Brahman are the three realizations, so a bit like that. So how can Brahman, which is impersonal and without qualities, can be described by Vedas, which are full of personalities and full of qualities? So it said here that the Vedas are guna vrityaya, full of qualitative descriptions, but Brahman is nirguna, without qualities. So obviously a metaphor based on the similar qualities cannot apply in the case of some of those qualities. Furthermore, Parikshit Maharaj points out that Brahman is sat asata, parama, means it's beyond the sat and asat, beyond all cause and effect. Having no connection with any material, any manifest existence, subtle or gross, the absolute cannot be expressed by either yogavrita, a meaning derived epistemologically, or lakshana, metaphor. This is actually like in Sanskrit, there's metaphor and epistemology, grammar, and this and that, which puts the word in certain ways and actually means different. So since both require relationships of Brahman and to other entities, so it's quite deep actually to try to understand this as to how something that is impersonal can actually be described and can have a personality or in a personal way. So Sukdev Goswami then answers this by referring to how Narad Muni received the instructions from Sri Narayana Rishi, who's always there in Badrinath ashram, who also refers this to Sri Sanandana, who was discussing this with the sages in Janalok. So this is actually 3 times kind of, described over and again. Sukdev Goswami refers to all these previous acharyas, or rather personalities. So, and this then includes the prayers of the Vedas. So Vedas are actually praying and glorifying the Supreme Personality of Lord, which you actually kind of gone through. So it's worthy to study, it's worthy of studying, as they are full of realizations and instructions. Very deep, actually. So, for example, thus we should understand that how Lord creates the cosmos entirely for the living entity's sake, because he's very compassionate. The living entities want freedom, but he wants to reclaim them back. So he's showing compassion in his soul. That's his soul motive. And when the soul eventually hankers to be freed from material life, the path of liberation is always available. So Krishna always make a path available. It's like there's always an exit. We've entered this material world, but there is an exit as well. So I think quite a deep chapter, but hopefully you can study it deeper. Thank you, Haribol.
Thank you. Absolutely. It's probably one of the harder chapters that we went through. So anybody else, any questions, any comments? Okay, so let's stop there. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.